in a WPIAL Championship win as Norwood defensively suffocates, offensively comes to life in the second half. They are the champions of 6A.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenour and Sean Meyers.
And welcome into the championship edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast right here on the Westmoreland Sports Network's YouTube channel. I'm Sean Meyers. That's Jack Ridenour. And Jack, we wanted to get together and do this podcast episode because it is an ode to the champions, or in some cases, the teams that finished with silver medals at the Pete. We had 5 Westmoreland County teams playing for WPIAL titles. Before we get into the specific games, quickly, your thoughts on what was a terrific weekend that you and I were both a big part of.
Just a lot of fun, right? I mean, just being able to see all that really good competition, a lot of great players, some great storylines. And like you mentioned, 5 Westmoreland County teams. I think if you had told people at the beginning of the season that 5 Westmoreland County basketball teams would be in the championship, I don't know if people would believe you, but I think this was a year where Westmoreland County basketball put themselves on the map. And I think moving forward, people should be giving a lot more respect to these teams coming from Westmoreland County. That's my biggest takeaway. A little bit more respect for us over at Westmoreland County.
Yeah, no doubt. Certainly that respect hard-earned throughout this season. And 5 teams played in the championships. 2 won them. We'll begin with the Norwin Knights girls. 56-41, they knock off their old nemesis, North Allegheny. And for the Knights, kind of a culmination of what they had been building to all season. We thought that this would be a championship caliber team heading into the season. I think they put everyone on notice when they won at North Allegheny to open the section. They then took care of business the second time around on their home court. But the question still remained. Could they beat North Allegheny when it was in the playoffs? And in this case, with the title on the line, because the Tigers had won so much with their 5 titles since 2017. Ultimately, I thought a little nerves early, but they showed their true grit and they showed what made them so great all season long. Incredible defense and then sound ball movement with different players offensively stepping up. I don't think you could in any given game say this is going to be our go-to player from start to finish. It's always kind of who is in the right position to make the play. And we saw a few different players. Ava Christopher certainly comes to mind. And then Lauren Pelangio, both ends of the floor, just dynamic.
Without a doubt. I mean, I think what was the biggest takeaway for me was how well the players coming off the bench played for Norwin. Look at Bella Furno and the job that she did coming off the bench. I felt that she was very assertive, very aggressive in the beginning. And then Ava Christopher also, I think all year long, she's kind of been this unsung hero for Norwin, playing in really big moments, playing really good basketball. And Kendall Berger is a player that all throughout the playoffs kind of guided her team to that point. And I think we'll mention Deer Lakes and Burrell in a little bit, but when you play a team for a third time in a season, it can be really hard to beat a team a third time. I mean, you hear it all the time because at that point, you've kind of shown each other what you're going to do. You might not have as many tricks up your sleeve. And so for North Allegheny, maybe coming into that game, maybe they feel a little bit more confident, like, hey, Norwin's got to beat us now for a third time. That's really hard to do. But as that game wore on, I think Norwin started to show their dominance, and especially, like you mentioned, defensively. I mean, Lauren Pelangio was a menace defensively, was fantastic, as she's been fantastic all year long. And I think that the post-game interview really summed it up perfectly. All those players in the post-game interview with Coach Brzezinski answering interviews, answering questions and whatnot, just shows that this is a collective team. It's not one player. You know, we can highlight Kendall Berger, we can highlight Lauren Pelangio or Bailey Snowberger, but it's a collective unit, and they that mentality, championship caliber, and that's what they showed over the past week. So a great job by Norwin, and also a really cool moment for Kendall Williams, obviously a player that had been hampered by injuries over the years, and getting to get out on the floor for the final seconds of the championship, I think just was a beautiful way to wrap up a fantastic season for Norwin that is not over. They're playing this week, right? I mean, they've got state playoffs coming up as well, so they still have other goals ahead of them as well.
Yeah, no doubt. They made it to the state semis last year, lost on a heartbreaker in overtime. I think they'll have a chance to get to the semis or maybe even further, but right now they're still celebrating, I think, this championship, or at least the community is, because it's a big one, third ever title in program history, and some unsung heroes. You talked about Ava Christopher. She stepped up offensively Bailey Snowberger, Ava Kobus really didn't do much offensively, but the job they did defensively was so important. And Snowberger in particular was covering Kelly McConnell for most of the game. So every player that stepped foot on that court in that game really had an impact in that victory. So congrats to the Norwin Knights. Much deserved for them and their head coach, Brian Brzezinski. They weren't the only girls team to capture gold, however. Greensburg Central Catholic, much like Norwin, we thought they would be a championship contender and maybe favorite from the get-go, and they lived up to it. 61-42. They knock off Sarah Catholic. And Jack, really, there's a lot of similarities because this was the third meeting between those section foes. GCC had to go 3-0 to win the title. They did that. And again, kind of, a slow start. I don't think that's a surprise because when teams play at the Pete, in that environment and that bigger venue, sightlines are different. Sometimes a little slow out of the gate, but I think once you get to that first media timeout, teams settle in. And once that happened, the Centurions kind of took over. In particular, Erica Gribble took over the second half.
Yeah, Gribble was fantastic. Maya Morgan was really good. Avery Davis pitched in 14 points. So again, it was kind of those same characters being important roles in that story. But to the point about playing in such a large arena like that, I think our colleague Meg Bolger made a great point. Just the depth perception when you first walk into a gym that big. I mean, that's not a gym, that's an arena. So now you're looking at stands that are much further back, right? So now you're looking at a hoop that is angled maybe a little bit differently in terms of, I mean, you look at a gym like GCC and they've got the kind of, the stage in the back. So it's kind of truncated a little bit. So you have that interesting wrinkle in it that you have to get adjusted to. And, for the most part, I think a lot of these games were a little bit slow out of the gate, just trying to get their footing. And let's not forget it's championship basketball, right? I think no matter what, just being in that environment, all of those fans, the community's out supporting you. People have driven 40 some minutes to come watch you play. And now you really start to realize, wow, this really means quite a bit. But I think what's so interesting about GCC is that some of those players on GCC could be playing at Norwin. Just think about that, right? I mean, you've got some players like, I know Erica Gribble, for instance, she could very well be playing at Norwin. And just it makes
She joined her sister as WPIAL champions. Remember, Elena had a historic performance in guiding Norwin to one of those or both of those back-to-back titles that we talked about.
And it makes you wonder how good Norwin or even how good Norwin could have been this year if you had players like Erica Gribble over at Norwin, right? I mean, we've talked about how good Norwin is all year long. How good they could even be further than that with those players from GCC. So another dominating performance by the Centurions and going all the way. And we mentioned all year long, they were on a mission and they accomplished that mission. And, give Sarah Catholic a lot of credit. They kept it very close. At one point, they were actually in front of GCC, a couple big spurts, a little 8-2 run here and there, and things started to build up for the Centurions. So a great job by GCC and another very complete season.
Well, let's just say from our perspective here in Westmoreland County, worked out perfectly, right? Because the Knights won the title, Greensburg Central Catholic with all those great players. They won the title. Abby DeLugos, I thought, was outstanding. And so we talk about sometimes you're a little slow out of the gate offensively, especially in terms of shooting the basketball, but you can still have the effort plays. And she brought the effort all night. She's basically a sixth starter. They had a starter in Peterson go down early. So she took on an expanded role. Her and Dupilka, who is good to see, she was able to battle through a little bit of an injury in that game and continue playing. So, you can say Gribble put up all the points, but when you're going against a championship caliber team like Sarah Catholic, you need everyone to contribute. And I thought DeLugos was probably the biggest X factor in that entire game.
And it's players like that you need to have kind of take you over to that next level, right? Because somebody's got to know that, hey, I'm not going to get the shots that a Maya Morgan will, or an Avery Davis will, or an Erica Gribble will. I have to do what I have to do. And, you mentioned Kara Dupilka. She's kind of a player, and I felt all throughout the season that she filled the gaps where it was needed, right? You hear about those glue players that kind of bring it all together. And I felt that Dupilka was a player all throughout the season that was kind of like that, right? That fourth player that if they needed scoring, they could go to her, but it wasn't necessary. And so it alleviates some of the pressure off of her. She can focus on playing defense, giving those 50-50 plays and giving extra energy there. Those little things. So then it kind of takes Erica Gribble away from having to worry about it while also having to worry about scoring. So everybody knows their role. And when you've got a team that everyone knows their role, it's a recipe for success. You're not dealing with egos. You're not dealing with, I didn't get my shots today, I didn't score my points. everybody's happy because everybody's winning.
Well, it was winning for the girls. The DCC and Norwin girls took care of business. So the girls teams in Westmoreland County went 2-0. Unfortunately, the boys went 0-3. And we'll begin with Franklin Regional. I thought it was a valiant effort by the Panthers. They were the underdogs, whether they said that or not, whether they thought that or not. I think that the perception was that Moon was the heavy favorite. And for a long time, it looked like the Panthers were going to pull off the upset. Unfortunately, Jack, they just went cold at a bad time. And conversely, Moon hit some big shots in the fourth quarter. I thought Jesse Reed should be incredibly proud of his effort. All those players should be. They were in there for about 28 minutes, probably the better team. Unfortunately, those other 4 minutes swung it in favor of the Tigers. Final score in that one, 53-48.
And let's not forget, Franklin Regional had a 10-point lead in the second half, right? I mean, they were so close to the finish line. And I think that at the end of the day, when you have a coach like Gino Palmasina, who is coached in WPIAL championships, he won them at Bishop Canevin, he won a state title at Bishop Canevin, he knows what to do in those situations. And there, I go back to a couple instances where he was calling timeouts when Moon had the ball simply because he did not like what offense they were running. And I think that just shows the experience of a coach of what they knowing what to do in a situation like that. Hey, our guys are not, doing what they're supposed to do. Let's regroup. We've got these media timeouts in our back pocket. And for all these coaches, that's a big adjustment, knowing that you have essentially 2 extra timeouts to use. So just like in the beginning of the year, everybody's adjusting to the new foul rules. Now you have to adjust literally at the end of the season to an extra 2 timeouts. How do you do that? How do you manage that? But for Jesse Reed's group, I mean, just an incredible effort, especially with where they came from last year, right? They lose 10 in a row to come out of the season last season. They get hit with the injury bug. They resurrect themselves this year. They come all the way back and get to the championship, and they march through the playoffs. I mean, I go back to the semifinal game against Shaler. They played Shaler earlier this season. I know you were on the call for it in a double overtime game. They beat Shaler by almost 20, if not almost 30 points, I believe, in the semifinal game. They started the game on a 17-5 run. They could not miss. And so you look at how Moon got there. They had a tough game against Thomas Jefferson, went down to the wire. And so I think in that case, Moon knew in a situation like that, okay, we're not going to panic. We were in a situation like this a few days ago. We know how to overcome that. And I think for Franklin Regional, it boiled down to the experience in a situation like that and in a scenario. And Moon just had the semi upper hand, but a lot of credit to Franklin Regional. Just an incredible season for the Panthers, and a big shout out to Cam Rowell getting his 1000th career point as well. Just an incredible milestone for a fantastic player.
And Jack, it at every level, basketball is kind of a make or miss game. And so fourth quarter, it was makes for Moon and it was misses for Franklin Regional. And sometimes you can do everything right, but the ball doesn't go in the hole. Tough way. But again, I think the biggest challenge now is how do the Panthers reset their mindset for the state playoffs? Because they were so close to winning what was probably their biggest goal, but now they have another massive goal potentially in front of them. And I think if they kind of get the right mindset, they could go on a run in the states as well. Hopefully that happens for the Greensburg Central Catholic boys. They certainly are going to want to forget about what happened against Aliquippa. The Quips had, I think, by far the best performance of any team all weekend. They won 69-32 in the number 1 seed versus number 2 seed battle. Aliquippa goes back-to-back in the 2A championship. Jack, it was truly, I'm not exaggerating, one of the best shooting performances I have ever seen in a game I've called both high school and college level for the Quips. They were 12 of 15 from the 3-point arc. Josh Pratt was unbelievable. He had 30-plus points, and honestly, he did it with relative ease. He didn't even have to force many shots. What they did, I think, and I'm not the only person who believes this because my colleague Greg Bizignani said the same. If Aliquippa plays that way that they did against Greensburg Central Catholic, they probably beat any boys team that was there all throughout the 3 days, including the 6A champion Upper St. Clair Panthers. Just an incredible performance in GCC. I don't know what you could have really done differently with the way that Aliquippa shot it. Obviously, the Centurions would want some of their possessions back because they struggled at times. They were a little loose with the basketball, didn't make shots that we've typically seen them make. But it was just a snowball that very quickly rolled downhill against them.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Aliquippa's now won 14 championships, 15, 14. So
tied for most ever with Newcastle.
And so it's a program that knows, again, you go back to how Moon just kind of knew what to do in a tight ball game. Aliquippa, that's just ingrained in the program, winning. Just that's the standard, right? I mean, as the great Mike Tomlin says here in Pittsburgh, the standard is the standard, and that's the standard for Aliquippa. And it makes me wonder, because I know that it's a hot topic to debate about, Aliquippa moving up to 5A for football, I believe, and all of that kind of, getting worked into things. Makes you wonder, if Aliquippa is dominating like this against a team that, let's face it, Sean, we were high on GCC all season long, marched right through the section. They
were legitimately second best team, I think, in 2A. I don't think it wasn't like a fluke that they got to the championship or that they, snuck in because they got some good matchups. They were legitimately all season long, I think, the second best team in 2A. They deserved to be there.
Oh, without a doubt. And there was not many teams, I believe, Sarah Catholic, maybe the one team that gave them a little bit of an issue. Outside of that, they played 5A. They beat Penn Trafford this season. That was a 5A playoff team, right? I mean, they were playing they were playing Hempfield. I know Hempfield struggled this year, but you're playing a team that's 4 classifications larger than you. On paper, you shouldn't be winning that game, and you're throttling them. So I think that for GCC, I think they just ran into a big wall of Aliquippa, right? And it makes you wonder, does Aliquippa maybe start thinking about, hey, obviously you want to keep winning, but maybe if you want to start stretching the competition a little bit, maybe you start thinking about, hey, maybe we should make a move up to 4 or 5A in basketball. I know Imani Christian is making that move from 1A to 6A. And, you look at that championship game, that was a dominating performance by Imani Christian. So maybe Aliquippa starts thinking, maybe we move up as well. But just a great journey for GCC. I know it's not done. They've got state playoffs ahead, especially with their head coach, Christian Highland, becoming a dad recently. His daughter was born on the day of the semifinals, about an hour before tip, and he still gets there in time for the game. So just an incredible fun run for GCC, and ultimately fell short. But I think that they just ran into a team that, they've been there time and time again, and they've won time and time again.
Yeah, certainly tough. And you feel for Tyree Turner, because remember, as a freshman, he played against a juggernaut team in Our Lady of the Sacred Heart in the championship game. Centurions came up short in that one. They hung tough against the Chargers. Unfortunately, this game, it just got away early. They were down 11-0, never recovered, and it felt like the game was over about late stages of the second quarter, to be honest. So you just have to wash it. You didn't get your one goal at WPIAL Championship. Now you have to say, what can we do to make a run in the States? And Coach Bizignani made a good point back in 2011. GCC got blown out by Monessen in a championship game in the WPIAL finals. They then defeated the Greyhounds a couple weeks later in the States, and they ultimately went all the way to playing in the state championship game. So I don't know it's going to turn out the exact same way, but certainly there's precedent that no matter what happens in the district championship game, you can still go on a run and maybe get a second crack at the Quips, potentially in the States, for the Centurions. Well, we talked about a couple of third-time matchups on the girls' side. That also applied, Jack. In the 3A boys, Deer Lakes and Burrell, a couple of very close matchups geographically there. Those rivals did battle for the third time, and for the third time it went in favor of the Lancers. They go back-to-back 55-49. So Burrell comes up short of winning a title, but they truly were a Cinderella story based on where they were seated, the teams they had to knock off. And they showed that they belonged. They truly were right there step for step with Deer Lakes. It came down to the same point, make or miss at the very end. The Bucks had a chance to tie it on a 3 in the closing moments, didn't go. Deer Lakes had a couple of foul shots. That was the difference. But really, the game was close all throughout. I thought the Buccaneers certainly hung tough.
And they used their defense in such a fabulous way. I know that this entire playoffs defense was really the calling card for the Buccaneers, and just the job that they were doing, in the games leading up to Deer Lakes. They beat Mohawk 51-34, if I'm not mistaken, in the semifinals. A fairly dominating performance, and they're doing it defensively, right? They're limiting another team to under 40 points. They had been limiting teams under 50 points. They held a team under 40 points. That's, incredible job to do. Mind you, that's a number 2 seeded Mohawk team that they beat. So they're doing that against one of the best teams in all of 3A. And let's not forget, right? Deer Lakes last year, they took down Ulsh in the championship, beat an Ulsh team that had a 74-game winning streak or something insane like that. And you have a lot of momentum on your side. Now Deer Lakes loses 4 of their 5 starters, but you bring back Billy Schaefer, who was in that position before. And you could tell he was kind of establishing himself early as a presence, was trying to let his presence be known. And ultimately, I think that was what carried them through, was that leadership from Schaefer and the free throw shooting. And that had been something that bothered them all year long. That was an Achilles heel for Deer Lakes, and that finally came through for them. I know that it helped them out in the semifinal game as well, where they had, I believe, 11 free throws in overtime. So Deer Lakes, they did a fabulous job. They did exactly what they needed to do. They had been in positions like that before. And for Burrell, I mean, no matter what, this is a season to remember. An 11 seed, you make it to the championship. And I think all of these seniors, they have to be very, very proud of the job and the legacy that they've left behind at Burrell.
Yeah, and it was about a decade earlier that the Buccaneers made a similar run to the championship. Couldn't get over the hump, but you have to give Coach Fantuzzo so much credit. We thought that they'd be an awfully good team this season. They got off to a good start. They returned so much from a team that was good last year. I don't want to say hit the skids because that's not accurate, but they had a little bit of a stretch where you wondered, would they really be a championship contender, or maybe just a team that's, trying to get one postseason win at best? The run that they made, they didn't knock off the number 1 seed, but I think they knocked off the number 2, number 3, and number 6 seeds, Jack. So it was really special. And it wasn't just Mackie Bennis, who obviously was a big part of it. It wasn't just Tucker Bitar, but I saw Esau King Buchek was terrific in that championship game at times. Malik Buchek was really good as well. I don't know what's going to happen with them in the States, but they, at least for one night, they showed they were right there with the very best team in all of 3A.
Yeah, and again, for that community, it's something that they'll always remember. I mean, that was a great atmosphere for a 3A game. Both communities really came to support both of their teams. And, coming into the game, these are teams that, like we mentioned, it's the third time that they were playing each other. They're rivals. They're deep, deep rivals. And so that kind of adds a little extra, a seasoning, if you will, into the entire thing. And it makes it a little bit more interesting as opposed to, two teams that don't really run into each other ever during the season, right? So that, I think, adds a new element to it. And coming into the game, I was reading some articles that both players on both teams kind of acknowledged some bad blood between the two teams because of just how close they are geographically. But again, you got to give a lot of credit to the job that Burrell did, especially with, how Coach Fantuzzo has built this team from the first year he had this team, they won 1 game or 2 games. They struggled immensely when he first took them over, and now they're playing for a championship this past year. That just shows you that if you take the time and the attention, you can build a program from nothing to something, and it can happen in a matter of a couple years.
Yeah, and we're the Westmoreland Sports Network, but part of Westmoreland Sports is in the AK Valley, the Alikiski Valley, and that was a big moment for them, for 2 of their teams. And I believe George Guido, the historian, the legendary sports writer in that area with the AK Valley, I believe he said it was the first time since the 1930s that 2 teams in the Alikiski Valley did battle for a championship. So, we mentioned with the Greensburg Central Catholic boys, you probably want to wash that memory. Even though they came up short, I think the Buccaneers, they're always going to have good memories of that experience. Yeah, you want to win, but they were right there. They proved that they belonged. And it was a great environment as well, Jack, between 2 kind of neighboring rival communities.
Yeah. And again, when you've got that added aspect, when the community comes to show out and they come to support, especially they're having to make the drive down to the city, which is not an easy thing to do.
Especially not during rush hour, my friend.
Especially not during rush hour. Do not want to do that. But I think that's what makes these championship games so much fun, is that there's so much anticipation. And again, everybody did not credit Burrell at all, right? They're the 11th seed coming into the playoffs. So people are kind of writing them off. Well, as the great Geno Smith said, I was written off, but I did not write back. Burrell did not write back, right? They took care of business, and yeah, they fell short, but these memories that these players and this coaching staff will have, it will be for a lifetime because of what they overcame and all the adversity that they overcame all throughout these playoffs.
Absolutely. And again, it's just phase 1 of the playoffs complete. Now it's phase 2 with the state playoffs. We'll look at that momentarily. I want to wrap up our trivia question because we had one a couple weeks ago when we last did the show, and it involves a Westmoreland County team that played for a championship. The question was, Greensburg Central Catholic boys coach Christian Highland, once again, congrats on becoming a dad, has played and coached in a WPIAL Championship game with the Centurions. Which team or teams did he face as a player, and which team did he go against as a coach? Well, the answer for the players, Seton LaSalle in 2014, his senior year, but he was on the roster when they played Monessen in 2011 as well. So either the Greyhounds or the Rebels would be correct. And then as a coach, he went against Our Lady of the Sacred Heart in 2021, the Chargers. And while it wasn't updated when I asked the question, you can now add Al Equipa in 2024 as well. So Christian Highland, twice as a player, twice as a coach, has been a part of a WPIAL championship game. Lastly, Jack, a look ahead. We mentioned the states on the horizon. Friday and Saturday action for not just the teams that played in the championships, but a few other Westmoreland County teams that qualified for the states as well. On the boys' side, Friday, it's Warwick at Franklin Regional. The Panthers, the runner-up, but they get a home matchup. Monessen, the boys, travel to Elk County Catholic. On Saturday on boys' action, Bishop Guilfoyle at Pearl, as the Buccaneers will try to bounce back. Derry area at Girard, Winburn at Greensburg Central Catholic, and Jeanette at Iroquois. On the girls' side, William Penn at Norwin, Bellwood Annis at Greensburg Central Catholic, and Monessen at Elk County Catholic. Does that sound familiar? Yes, both the boys and girls for the Greyhounds are playing at Elk County Catholic. The Monessen girls were supposed to play on Saturday, but because the boys are going up Friday, I guess they petitioned and successfully got the girls' game moved to Friday as a doubleheader as well. But, you know, we're not going to spend time breaking these games down necessarily, but this is a big test for the teams that won titles. Can you reset your focus and say, we're not going to rest on our laurels, we're not going to have a hangover? For the teams that came up short, can you kind of remove that disappointment of losing in a championship and reset the focus? And then for some other teams like the Jeanette and Derry area boys, for instance, they had to play their way and earn their way into the states. It's kind of a new slate for them as well. So it's very interesting. I think the states for WPL teams, more than anything else, it's about the mindset.
Yeah, and I think the teams that won a championship sometimes might be at a disadvantage, right? I mean, you won the championship. Okay, what else do we have to do? And that becomes the next thing, right? You still have a goal ahead. And I think for the teams that lost, for instance, for Franklin Regional, I think that they'll be able to bounce back really well because they're hungry. They're frustrated. Their last game they played, they lost. And that's going to make you want to be so motivated to get back out on the floor. So I'm excited to see how Franklin Regional bounces back because, again, especially when they are that close to winning a championship, up by double digits in the second half. I mean, I'm sure that Cam Rowell, Cooper Rankin, Coach Jesse Reed, the whole crew is just itching to get back out to the hardwood and get back out to playing.
Well, Jack, we'll have to see what happens throughout the states over the next couple of weeks, but potentially might be the final time that we sign off here this season, as we had a great time covering all of the regular season, all throughout the playoffs, culminating with 5 Westmoreland County teams playing in the championship. So we want to thank everyone who tuned in all season long, but for now, we'll put a bow on this one. For my colleague, Jack Ridenour, Sean Meyers signing off. You've been tuning into the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast right here on the Westmoreland Sports Network's YouTube channel.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.